Hi, this is Tim Wendel, the author of several books about baseball, novels, and narrative nonfiction. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 23rd annual Fall for the Book Festival. These free online events run the last 2 weeks of October and can be rewatched anytime on Crowdcast or on our own YouTube channel. To follow us on Crowdcast, click on the Fall for the Book icon above this window and then click follow. And what could be easier than that? Or you can subscribe on the YouTube channel. The link will be in the chat too. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my teammates for the grand game, then and now. First off, Ethelbert Miller is a literary activist, radio host. I've been on his show, it's awesome. Writer, poet, and baseball aficionado. His first book of baseball poems was If God Invented Baseball. I think God probably did. And his latest release, you gotta get this, When Your Wife Has Tommy John Surgery and Other Baseball Stories. We're happily joined by Cesar, Brioso, a now producer, he's gonna have to tell me what now means at some point, for USA Today Sports and a lifelong seamhead. His books about baseball history include Havana Hardball, Spring Training, Jackie Robinson, and the Cuban League, as well as Last Seasons in Havana, the Castro Revolution, and the end of professional baseball in Cuba. Gentlemen, welcome aboard. We're gonna have some fun here for a little bit. We've already had a bizarre regular season. We can even go back to that if you want, but even the last couple of weeks, and I'm a little blurry-eyed from staying up too late watching the Giants and the Dodgers, so if I suddenly keel over, you guys carry on. But I wanted to start with a little bit of now with the grand game. And in a sense, what's been your most memorable or favorite moment so far in the regular season or certainly in the playoffs? And Cesar, why don't you bat lead off for us here? I mean, you're churning this stuff all the time. What's really stood out for you?
Well, I'll let my biases shine through. I love the Randy Arozarena steal of home. That was just spectacular. And especially coming off of what he did last season in the postseason, you're thinking, oh boy, here he goes again. And it was a good series. The Rays just fell short, but that was just such a stunning and spectacular moment.
Shades of Rod Carew. I wish we were seeing more of that. Ethelbert, what are you thinking? Or did Cesar steal your thunder?
The same exact incident. I mean, I looked at Randy Rosa, and what I was impressed by was the fact that it was not like a double steal. I was also impressed by the fact that it was a head first slide. When you go back and look at Jackie Robinson, who stole home 19 times, you always see Jackie Robinson, that in the World Series, and his foot just seems to be getting in there, and Yogi Berra still saying he's out, But there was no question that Randy was safe. Now, he came up smiling.
I don't know what Yogi was complaining about there. But.
Yeah, and I think because it was head first, it was really, the only thing that you could say, the score was 4-0, they were leading anyway. But for a young player, I think he put his mark on the game.
And there's spectacular photos I've seen from overhead from the catwalks in Tropicana that are really spectacular.
Oh yeah, there's great angles on all that shot. I'll throw another one in, maybe two that maybe weren't as from all angles as those. But I'm thinking of. And this is what I love about baseball. As you guys well know, we have a history that goes well back, and sometimes it just kind of jogs the memory bank. And I'm watching the Red Sox, in the 13th inning, and here comes Christian Vasquez up to the plate. And the thing that flashes through my mind is, when was the last time a catcher hit a home run? It's Carlton Fisk in 75. And then like seconds later, Vasquez hits it. And I'm just going, wow, that was pretty cool. And then we'll maybe get a little bit deeper in this last night. One reason I'm blurry-eyed, maybe a little bit distraught, is last night's a check swing heard around the world, but we might get into that a little bit later. Speaking of history, one of the things I love about this game is, and Roger Angel and I once talked about this while sitting in the auxiliary press box at some postseason game, but how all of us come to this game with maybe a particular or personal origin story, so it turns baseball fans into fans for life. And I think in some ways that's different than other games, other sports. And so I'd like to dive into that a little bit. Ethelbert, what made you a fan forever? Do you remember that moment or that game, or just what rocked your world?
No, a combination of things. I was playing punch ball in elementary school, and then it was like stick ball, with a Spalding, and then it was collecting baseball cards. So it's like sounds like a little trinity. But those are the three things I think really stood out for me and pulled me into the game. I mean, I might have been collecting comic books and stuff, but the whole thing in terms of going out with my friends, we're kids, we're playing in the neighborhood, playing in the street at times when we're not supposed to. Those are the things that I remember. And then it's going to Yankee Stadium, which was not far from my house there in the South Bronx. Those are the memories I have.
That first day walking in the Yankee Stadium, what was that like?
Well, it was before you got into Yankee Stadium. I mean, we were out there, little kids with little gloves trying to get autographs, and nobody would give us autographs because the Yankees walked into the stadium the way they dominated the American League. They just pushed the kids out of the way like they were the Kansas City Athletics, And so what happened, the only person who was nice to us was Jim Bouton back then. In those days, he would line us up and, we could get things signed. But those were, I think, just going to the ballpark, the smell, being out there, and then, the game.
Yeah, and so Jim Bouton was a favorite of yours well before Ball 4, so maybe
exactly.
Cesar, what clicked with you? Do you remember the moment, or the team, or the memory?
Well, we lived in Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, and I did go to a Yankees game. My dad took me when I was really little, but it was like 5 or 6, and just all I remember is sort of the enormity of how big everything felt. I don't remember any specifics about the game because I was so young, but I spent my youth in New York and New Jersey watching WPIX, the Yankees. And I guess the moment is actually kind of a tragic moment in terms of how important baseball was to me, how much it hit me. I remember the day living in New Jersey when my dad comes home from work one evening and he tells me that he heard on the radio that Thurman Munson had died. Mm-hmm. And that game when they came back after the services and Mercer has a spectacular game, drives in all the runs. We're in the family room and my parents are sitting behind me, and I'm trying not to let them know that I'm just crying watching this whole thing unfold. That's when I sort of, I was always a baseball fan before then anyway, same thing, collecting cards, watching the game on TV. But that's when it sort of, I realized how much it mattered to me.
Yeah.
Cesar, when you say that, I remember that game, and that was a game in which the Yankees wanted to win. Yep. And I think Bobby Mercer did the eulogy,
Yeah, that's right. He did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they wanted to carry it on. Well, I don't have anything quite that epic, but I'm always intrigued, especially with Cesar there with the Cuban, garb in the background, which we're going to get to here very shortly. But I grew up a Red Sox fan, which is kind of bizarre because I grew up near the Buffalo area. But the only reason I grew up a Red Sox fan is that was the name of my Little League team. And my younger brother, grew up a Tiger fan because that was his Little League team. And also we had family up in northern Michigan, so we globbed onto that. And I remember, it's difficult now because I know Red Sox Nation has become so insufferable, and I try to distance myself a little bit from that. But for a long time, I even wrote an essay at one point. I got to find the adult supervisor who stuck me with this team because it's killing me. Between
not anymore.
67 and then certainly 86, and you're just going, what? But unlike I think other sports, you don't trade it in. You don't kind of throw away the T-shirt and say, well, now I'm going to be, God forbid, a Yankee fan. But let's see. One thing I want to do here today, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun, is we're going to pause a couple times. And Ethelbert, you're the poet. I'd love to have you read a couple poems as we kind of go through. And are you ready to swing away, my friend?
Yeah. In fact, I'll read a poem from the book that's coming out next year, How I Found Love Behind the Catcher's Mask. This is a poem in 7 short sections. Every Buddhist is a baseball player. 1, the bullpen is quiet when it laughs at the scoreboard and rubs its belly. 2, the rally over, you're the third out, your bat asleep on your shoulder. 3, falling from the sky, the ball a small moon, falling like an eclipse into a glove. 4, the designated hitter sits in the dugout practicing sitting meditation. 5, dirt on a jersey, a symbol of devotion to the game. 6, every Buddhist, a baseball player, each breath, a pitch, a catch, a hit. 7, the road from the minors to the majors is the path of 2 directions.
Oh, that's great. I don't know, can we do the beatnik thing and do that?
You picked the right person to do the readings.
I knew he was good on that. I wanted to alert people too, as we get farther in the conversation, you can join us too. With any question you may have, simply post it in the chat and I will try my best to get to those. Let's pivot a little bit. As we all know, even though I think this is undersold sometimes in the general populace, baseball is an international game. I mean, there's people from all over the world playing at the major league level. In my mind, it's as international as hockey or even pro basketball, even though Maine doesn't get the credit. One of the longtime hotbeds has been Cuba, and this is an infatuation Cesar and I both share. But and what people don't realize is they've been playing baseball in Cuba almost as long as they have in this country. Cesar, I know there's a family connection here, but in a sense, start with that. And how did you really dive into this that has influenced your 2 landmark books?
Yeah, well, I mean, my dad grew up in Havana in the 40s and 50s. He was a fan of Almendares. You see the cap and the jersey behind me. I was one of the 4 teams in the Cuban League, in the Winter League. And, you know, he would just tell me stories about particularly American players who would come down in the winter to play, you know, at that time, you know, Tom Lasorda and Monty Irvin and Ray Dandridge. And he always told me these stories as a kid. And, you know, probably like most kids, I said, okay, yeah, whatever. I'm really interested in what's going on in the game now. But, you know, I became a sports writer. And at some point, I started to try to find some of these old ball players that retired. I was in Florida and started finding them. Max Lanier, Agapito Mayor from one of the Cuban players. They retired throughout different places in Florida, some in my area. I was working at a small paper in Ocala at the time. And as I started to sort of gather these interviews, I was like, I need to write a book about this. And I became more and more interested. And really, in a way, the books were, as much as being about baseball, they were for me a way of connecting with my heritage and my family. I was born in Cuba, but we left after the revolution when I was 5 months old in 1965. So the exploring Cuban baseball history really has helped connect me with my family history as well.
And you, if I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've never been back, right?
I have not been back. The closest I've been was we went to Jamaica on a vacation and we flew over Cuba, which I don't know why I didn't think about it, before the trip. But as we're flying and I look out the window and I suddenly see this thick swath of green underneath as we're flying over the center of the island, and that's when it hit me like, oh my gosh, we're over Cuba. But yeah, no, I haven't been back. I want desperately to go, but I have not done it yet.
We gotta get you there. Ironically, here I am, a guy who has no connections, at least family-wise, with Cuba. And I've been there 4 times, and I originally ended up going pretty much on an assignment. This was in '92 for USA Today International, when USA Today had an international print edition, and they sent me down to cover an exhibition series between the U.S. Olympic team and Team Cuba. And Team Cuba was phenomenal. And it's interesting. I think all of us would agree. There's certain times where life or time trips you up. And I remember being in the stands. They didn't really have a press box. And there was a number of us there. Dan Lebitard, Howard French from AP. And I was the guy I was sitting on the end of the row and in the stands. And in the middle of the game, this Cuban gentleman came up, and this is where I needed Cesar because my Spanish is still brutal. And he came up, and the reigning world champions were the Minnesota Twins. They had beaten the Atlanta Braves, in a sense, the season before. I ended up writing a book about that too. And this guy comes up and says, "Tell me about the Minnesota Twins." And I'm going, okay. And I went into my sports talk radio thing. It's going to be difficult to repeat. They're going to lose players. And he said, "I know all that." And I went, "Oh, what do you want to know?" And he said, "What do they look like?" And at that point, I went, oh my, I don't know quite where I am, but this is bizarre. And so with Dan's help and French's help and such, I went around the diamond and tried to describe them as well as I could. Put Ken Herbeck at first base, Jack Morris on the mound, and finished with Kirby Puckett in center field. And as I was doing so, I was looking out toward the field, just trying to do a relatively good job. And when I was done, I turned back to this guy and I said, there you go. There's your 1991 World Series champions. And he had tears starting to run down his face. And he got up and tapped me on the back and said, thanks. Now I know. And at that point, my friend still teased me, you know what, Hemingway had the whole old man in the sea, I had the old man in the ballpark. And that sent me in this whole crazy direction about trying to learn as much about Cuba and baseball as I could. Ethelbert, you know, Cesar's dad was seeing some amazing Negro League stars and such. And, you know, Ray Lanforth, Monty Irvin. And recently, one of the things that happened this season, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't really dive into it, is the Negro League statistics. Their numbers are now have been accepted by Major League Baseball. How should we view that? And is that
I'll make a link, you know, because I got a chance to see Minnie Minoso play, you know, in terms of Cuba.
Yeah,
and
I was amazed. Great piece on Minnie.
Right. I was amazed at the number of triples the guy had. Like, maybe I think it's first, yeah, he's remember that. But, you know, one of the things I'm getting ready to do actually next week is interview Martha Ackman. And Martha Ackman wrote this book, Curveball, The Remarkable Story of Tony Stone, because, you know, she played in the Negro Baseball League. Actually, I think we played Hank Aaron in terms of Indianapolis Clowns. What I find very important, even before we deal with the stats, is that we have to make sure that we move beyond simply a few names, you know, Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige. And I think that one of the ways to do this is that some of the sports announcers, when they're calling the games, they're going to have to start mentioning some of these players and mentioning some of the records that, you know, they established. That's the way to get it into people talking and knowing more. And then I think for some of the Negro Leagues players, we may need some biopics. You know, you can go back and look at the Jackie Robinson story, you know, but there needs to be some movies. I think there's a play around Tony Stone, you know, recently. But that's a way of getting these names beyond just simply being statistics, okay? But it is a problem in terms of statistics in terms of, say, Ichiro. Do you include his Japanese statistics with his U.S., especially when it's records, you know? I would probably think that there would be some resistance if somebody did some research and found out that there was a player in the Negro Baseball League who hit in 57 consecutive baseball games, you know, and all of a sudden you're like saying, okay, this guy's replacing Joe DiMaggio. So you got problems taking out some monuments from Civil War heroes, you know, Confederate heroes. You'll have some problem because some of these records are so tied to culture. You know, some of these records are Italian. You know, we're talking about Cuban, but, you know, these Italians like saying, okay, we're going to take Frank Sinatra and move him over here. No, you're not, you know. And so it's very sensitive, but at the same time, this is what we see happening in our society.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
I'm fearful. It's interesting, and Cesar, chime in too, please. You brought up announcers and these, in a sense, they're more than numbers when we talk about the Negro Leagues. They're lost stories. They're lost individuals. They're lost narrative. And you talk about, hey, it'd be great if the announcers worked in a little bit about, I don't know, you know, somebody else other than Josh Gibson or Cool Papa Bell and compare him to somebody today. That sounds great, but I'm fearful that the announcing has gotten so vanilla in a way that that almost seems a step beyond for a lot of them. I mean, I still treasure the old days when I could tune in the old transistor radio and without even quite getting the team yet, just hearing, oh, I'm listening to Jack Brickhouse.
Sure, but Tim, what you're describing is no different if we were, you know, curators for the Smithsonian. You know, after a while, we'd have to change the exhibits, okay? So some of the announcers, you know, in preparation for these jobs, they're going to have to say, okay, you're going to have this knowledge, okay? And what do you see? The same way when we look at, you know, sports in terms of issues of diversity, we have to move beyond the field. We have to move into ownership, you know, calling the games, all these things. You know, when you're listening to the announcers of these games, it is the announcer who said, oh, I think Cesar would make a really good manager. Okay.
Well, then Cesar gets the job.
Cesar gets the job.
Softball manager, right? That's what we're talking about, right?
That's exactly right. Cesar, can it be done with the way baseball is set up right now? I mean, this all sounds great, but you're covering this on a daily basis.
Well, I mean, you'd have to have, I think, more African-American announcers, right? You'd have to have more Latino announcers to get the stories that you're talking about, I think. And I mean, that's the issue, I think, with Major League Baseball, just generally speaking. What, 7% African-American, the players now, that's all there is, which is just a shocking number considering, this is the anniversary of the Pirates, all Black and Latino lineup that they fielded. So that's where you're going to get, very few Latino managers, for example, or African-American managers or front office people. And so, it's not just broadcasters. You need to get more diversity sort of throughout baseball in order to, I think, get to the place you're talking about, to have those stories told. And not just during, say, Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month.
Mm-hmm. And Cesar, one thing I always tell people, so when they say, okay, we don't see that many, Black players playing baseball. And I always say, you mean Black players playing baseball who speak English, because what happened, we have to redefine how we see ourselves as being Black.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's open this up. I want to go a little bit farther beyond the announcers. I mean, it's easy to criticize them, and I often do it. But baseball, for much of its history, and I'm now going back, it reflected, but it also influenced the larger world around. I'm thinking Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in 1947, first major sport to do that. I'm thinking of, say, two teams, that I have an affinity for, Detroit Tigers, St. Louis Cardinals in 1968. They helped hold the country together simply by embracing diversity in their lineup and playing with great excellence. Is baseball still up for doing this kind of heavy lifting? And I know they never volunteer for it, but when these things kind of rolled down, at least before, they would do, I guess, the right thing, to quote Spike Lee. Do you think that's still there, Ethelbert?
Well, I think what happened, we all have a responsibility, it's not just baseball, it's our entire society. I mean, some people say, like, is there a problem with baseball? I said, well, there's a problem with American democracy, when you look at the big picture. And so, everyone has to do their work and do some heavy lifting. That's the only way it's going to change.
Mm-hmm. Cesar, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, we finally did see sort of some of that, after the Jacob Blake shooting. 3 games were postponed, and some individual players sat out. That I think, but that was largely driven by the African, whether it was Mookie Betts or I guess Jason Hayward, I think sat out, driven by African-American players. I was shocked when baseball moved the All-Star game after the Georgia voting law. So you're starting to see some of it, but if you're comparing it to what we see in the NBA or even the WNBA, no, they're not as proactive in that area of social justice.
And is that a fault of the owners, players, or a combination thereof?
I mean, it might be just the sort of makeup of the league, just broadly speaking. Like I said, 7% African American, and I don't know what the percentage is of Latino players. Probably 20s, 25, I think is what it is. So it's a largely white game compared to, say, the NFL or the NBA. So that probably has something to do with it as well. It is a conservative sport. It always has been. Certainly from ownership. Right?
Well, see, that's what it is. It is ownership. I mean, if we look at it at other sports, I think many of the NFL owners, I think voted for Donald Trump. If you look at owners, look at some of the decisions made by Derek Jeter with the Miami Marlins. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's encouraging all his players, to staff, to speak Spanish. He's hired, an Asian woman in terms of being in the managing. So you can see right there the ownership. Okay, if I recall, I think in Washington, I think Clifford Alexander and some other African Americans, James Brown, wanted to buy the Nationals. I mean, they lost out to the Lerner family, but what you're talking about is ownership. You saw what happened with the Atlantic women's basketball team, in terms of, forcing their owner out. And now, African Americans leading up to buying those teams. And that's basically what Jackie Robinson was saying, in terms of, it's going to be the managers and the owners if you're going to talk about the real change.
Right. It's funny, every now and then it's not as much as it used to be, but when I'd sometimes talk to some Fortune 500 companies, and invariably one of the questions would come up in a sense about social awareness, bringing in, I guess, talent of color, for lack of a better term. And they were very interested in this, and in terms of what was going on with baseball. And they would often ask, who's doing this well? And my reply often was, look at the standings. With some exceptions, they're treating it more as an organization. And I still remember my first trip down to the Dominican Republic, and it kind of threw me where, and the Dominican Republic is, pretty much third world. And yet we're going now out into the countryside. And I still remember coming around this corner and looking up at this facility up on a hill, and it could have been a Holiday Inn Select, in some suburban US city. And I was like, why? And who is this for? And in a sense, the ones running that particular camp and that for that particular major league organization, and I thought it was a little over the top. And they said, no, we have to get the talent that's going to go north, up the El Norte, try to play in the major leagues, used to living out of a hotel like a Modesto or Great Falls or, wherever it may be, because we want our talent to succeed. And I thought, and I found myself standing corrected to a certain point. And that organization has been doing pretty well lately. I won't name it necessarily, but let's just say they're one of the 4 teams still alive right now in the playoffs. But again, some people would step back and, I'm now changing sports a little bit. And, after LeBron spoke out and people, I forgot, shut up and dribble type of thing. Is this part of sport these days? Is it something sport is ready to take on? Ethelbert, I'm going to let you go.
Well, we have to say sports. So right now, for example, we would go from baseball to football, with the Raiders, okay? And I think what that showed is, okay, there's a culture that's there that has to be exposed, when you begin to look at these correspondence between people who are in key positions. So it's not enough to just say, maybe put some signs, say Black Lives Matter, in the ballparks. It has to go beyond there. And we also have to be honest is that we all are have a degree of being prejudiced or, having having certain views against certain ethnic groups. And that's what, sometimes that's how we were raised. I remember my sister, I had to correct her. I said, you're not talking about, Asian Americans as if they're, Orientals, like they're rugs, the language sometimes we have to learn, or the fact that when we talk about the Caribbean, we lump everybody. You're Jamaican, you're Cuban, you're Dominican. You go somewhere, especially in New York, you say you're Haitian or you better get your island right. You know what I'm saying? And it's the thing. I came to Howard, and when I came to Howard, then I realized that I was not African American. When I went into, I said, wow, this is not what I grew up. And then I began to realize, okay, my father was born in Panama. He couldn't read his birth certificate because he lost the language. Okay. And this is why when you see what Derek V is doing with the Marlins, yes, it's very important for people to be in our hemisphere to be bilingual.
Mm-hmm. Okay? I totally agree. And I think Cesar would totally agree with that too. I think of at least the language situation many of the players, say from Cuba or the Caribbean overall, have to overcome to get here is profound. So,
and we should meet them halfway.
Yeah. Imagine if you're a reporter, imagine the advantage you have if you do speak Spanish and covering a baseball team. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of still, even today, I don't think a lot of reporters covering MLB do speak Spanish.
Yeah, which I find amazing. And I don't speak Spanish very well, but just being able to use some terms, it just opens up the world. Cesar, let's keep going with this a little bit. Current state of the game, and we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit. We've got a labor agreement due to expire, I think December 1st, if I remember right, or something. Some would say baseball's in trouble. Others contend, it's business as usual, everything's fine. Look at all the money they're making. Well, what's your sense of things? And I'm very curious because I covered the last labor debacle in 93, 94, and a part of me is getting a little antsy. So can you reassure me or no?
I don't know if I can reassure you, but is this the get off of my lawn segment of the program? Is that what?
I'll take a nap right now.
I mean, look, I don't know that baseball is in trouble per se, but I also don't think everything's just fine. And if I could oversimplify it, I would probably say something like too many strikeouts. Just the way everybody talks about the length of games, how long they are, but really it's the sort of lack of action that you see. It's hard to say that now. I mean, right now in the playoffs, it's great, right? I mean, it's intense. There's every pitch matters, but you get a 4-hour game in June, and it's just like you start looking around on your dial. Where else can I go? So it's just how different the game is now in terms of philosophy, especially hitting. Like I was at the South Florida Sun Sentinel in 2000 when Preston Wilson was in danger of catching Bobby Bonds' strikeout record. Right, it was like 189. And K was like a scarlet letter in baseball. Every day toward the end of the season, Preston Wilson had to answer questions about strikeouts. And now nobody cares. It's okay if you strike out 200 times. So many at bats end either strikeout, home run, or walks. And when they hit the ball and when they put it in play, they hit in their shift. So those are the things that just like I actually looked this up. It was really interesting. Bonds struck out 189 times in 1970. So from 1971 to 2000, when Preston Wilson challenged, batters struck out 180 times or more 6 times. That's it. Since then, from 2001 to now, that's happened 63 times.
Ooh.
I'm
falling asleep on the couch.
Yeah. And, it's all part of the analytics, and I'm not against analytics. I think it's a great tool for finding players that other people aren't paying attention to or don't. But it's sort of the strategies that those analytics have birthed when you start stacking them on top of one another. They make perfect sense in and of themselves for trying to win a ball game. It doesn't necessarily create a good spectator experience.
Right. We just got a question in on the chat. Actually, we're starting to get some in. I'm going to serve you up this first because I'm interested about this in terms of poetry. What are some of the things, if anything, you wanted to put in some of your collections or books, but had to leave them out? Anything you left out?
It's I've got 3 books on baseball. The third one's coming out. So I knew what I was leaving out of the first 2. So I'm trying to correct that. One of the things I wanted to do was make sure, and maybe this ties into the Negro Baseball League, I wanted to begin to have more history, draw upon more baseball history before I was drawing upon my, childhood memories, or I was using baseball as a metaphor. But I felt that, I could really maybe do more in terms of baseball history, focusing on incidents so the next book has the Black Sox scandal, or people like Jimmy Pearsall or Emmett Ashford, people very important to the game, so that when you're reading it, even if you're not a baseball fan, you say, okay, this is important in terms of American history.
Okay, kind of playing off what you were talking earlier, but we've lost these narratives and you've got to bring them back in. Cesar, I think maybe especially with the world you've been writing about, is there anything that you've had to leave out? And maybe it's, I'm making a leap of faith right now with a little bit of my Cuban knowledge, and maybe it's incorrect, but maybe somebody would have gotten into trouble or been called out if they were still back on the island and such. Anything you had to leave out that maybe you wanted to have in?
No, nothing along those lines. For me, it's more like I wish I had gotten a hold of certain players, that either they were no longer around, or that didn't want to participate when I tried to get interviews. That's more than what I left out. Like in last seasons of Havana, one guy I just tried desperately to get a hold of was Camilo Pascual, and just all I could get was voicemail. And from everything I understand, he's a terrific guy, but really private, and just not really interested in talking about
your big curveball.
Yeah. So I mean, that was like one of the ones I really wish I could have just gotten to talk to him about that particular period of time that I was writing about. So that's, in terms of leaving out, that's what I wish I'd done, is the guys I wasn't able to get a hold of, to get them into the book, to get their voice into the book, even though I told their story, but get it from them first person.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk. I want to go a little bit deeper. Another great question coming up on the chat, maybe better than my questions. Is there a connection between the creativity of writing and the creativity of sports? And Ethelbert, I'm going to start a little bit with you on the poetry. And I mean, is there a certain kind of vibe or juice you can bring out of that?
There's a creativity. You know, one of the people that I got to blurb my last book was Liz Lerman, who is a dancer and choreographer, you know, also MacArthur, you know, award winner. And when I got her, I was thinking of, you know, Ozzie Smith, you know, the shortstop, and how he would come out, and, you know, there's something very beautiful, acrobatic about him. And so I said, you know, let me look at the game, even though Liz Lerman, you know, is a baseball fan, but, you know, I was looking at these disciplines where you can bring them together. Like right now, I'm also looking at, in terms of creativity, looking at baseball through the eyes of a visual artist. You know, and that's where I begin to look at how some of the actual design of a ballpark takes on certain geometric beauty.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's good. Cesar, anything come up, especially, you know, you've been doing kind of daily journalism, and then to segue over to larger works, to books like, you know, Havana Hardball and such. I mean, what was the creative process there?
Well, it was actually kind of liberating. There was a lot more freedom, right? I mean, because there's time, and you have the length of a book to tell your story, as opposed to 500, 800 words, whatever you might be limited to for a daily story, and just the time elements, the deadlines you're dealing with. So I just found it just the freedom and the time to sort of be able to really do a deep dive into, in my case, Cuban baseball history, or whatever time period you're talking about. That's the thing that I enjoyed most about it, as compared to the daily journalism. I've been more of a website producer now and an editor than I have been a writer. I only do writing here and there now, but so the books really were my sort of writing outlet these last 5 or 6 years. You know, in terms of compared to what my job is.
I find it interesting you were saying liberating, because I know when I moved out of daily journalism and started doing, you know, both novels and nonfiction, at times that liberation almost stymied me, almost got hung up in it, almost hung me. And I remember when I was working on Castro's Curveball, the first novel I did set in Havana. And the only thing that kept me going, and I don't know, everybody works differently, but I need like about a 1 or 2 sentence pitch line or log line. And I put it up on my bulletin board, because I tend to lose track of things really fast, like what the heck I'm supposed to be doing. And I would look at that each morning and go, oh yeah, okay, I'm writing this. And Curveball didn't click for me until I came up, it was just one line, a love story set in old Havana about a baseball pitcher who might have been. And at that point I went, okay, you know, now I'm liberated. Now I can go all over the place. But until this point, I was getting lost a great deal. Let's see, we got a question from Luke. Oh, an Astros fan. Okay, we're trying not to hold that against him. He likes Yuri Gurriel. What's his role? Cesar, if you can speak to that in terms of Cuban baseball history. Give him the backstory on
Gurriel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, the two, Yuri and his brother Lourdes Jr., right? They're with the Toronto. They both defected several years ago, and basically they're kind of like baseball royalty in Cuba. Their dad was a star in the post Castro era, and then they were top players there too, and before they defected. So that's really kind of Gurriel is like one of the biggest names in Cuban baseball, since the Castro Revolution. Just that last name, at least 2 generations of star players.
So it opens doors in Havana, and always will. We're kind of coming down we're rounding third here a little bit. Ethelbert, I got time for another poem. If you would love to read us.
I'll read the last poem in When Your Wife Has Tommy John Surgery.
Which is a great title, by the way. I think I know several marriages like that.
Okay. When the gains return. When the gains return, we will not hide behind the mask. We will race out onto the field to bask in fellowship and embrace the sky, sun, and the 4 bases below. There will be no fear in the air, no sickness in the stands. There will only be cheering and clapping, and the knowing that baseball is what matters, and our dreams are round and hard, and at times get caught in our gloves. When the tarp is lifted and rolled back, a sudden beauty will appear. It will be the memories of what we've missed and what we love. It will be baseball. It will be prayer.
I could listen to you read poetry all day, my friend. We are being asked, we're being put on the spot here a little bit. We've got, in essence, 4 teams left. What's your pick to win it all?
Oh, you have to be sentimental, Tim. You have to root for Dusty Baker.
I got to root for Dusty Baker, even though he's managed at the end.
We're not even talking the Astros. We're talking Dusty Baker.
Dusty Baker always called me dude. You can never remember my name. But then I heard later he called everybody dude. And you couldn't remember anybody's name. So, Cesar, what are you thinking?
I think it's going to be the Dodgers. I wish there were some other teams that have already been knocked out that were in the mix right at this point, but I do think the Dodgers are going to win it. I think they're going to beat the Astros.
Yeah,
Tim.
I'm afraid you're right. I mean, after last night, I'd like to close a little bit. This just went up on The Athletic, and actually the headline, it was kind of out of the San Francisco end of things. The headline's amazing. The Giants lost to the Dodgers, but don't worry, you only feel bad about it until you die. And the last paragraph here is great because I think it kind of sums up where we're at in terms of the season and everything. The last couple lines are, baseball is pain. Baseball is joy. You'll get the former, and it'll make the latter much sweeter. But more often than not, baseball is pain. And don't forget that. Thank you to George Mason and Fulford Look. Thank you to my compadres here. You guys always carry me on these things, and it's great. And let's see, folks can click on the green button, I believe, in the Crowdcast window for any of the books that were mentioned here today, and maybe some that weren't mentioned either. But just everybody in the audience, and play ball, enjoy the rest of the season, and be well.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Nice meeting you once again, Cesar. Take care.
Nice meeting you.
All right, many blessings.